do not think that because you're going to be working from home, you're like going to have a bunch of free time. There is flexibility and there's free time. When you're working from home, if you're doing it correctly, you will dedicate the hours and the effort to your work. Remote work, it's not escape. It's probably going to make it more enjoyable, but definitely you need to understand that remote work, it's still work.
Welcome to the Hired Hub podcast, your ultimate guide to mastering the complexities of remote work and pushing your career forward.
Whether you're tuning in from the busy streets of Latin America or any corner of the globe, we're here to give you tools and insights to succeed in today's dynamic job market. I'm your host, Gabby Morales.
And I am your co-host, Jess Torres. If you're a recent graduate eager to leave your mark or a seasoned pro looking to redirect your career, you can join us as we explore the endless possibilities of remote work and career growth.
Get ready to unlock your full potential with the Hired Hub podcast. Welcome back to the Hired Hub. Today, we're talking about changing your career path and delving into the remote work world. So, if you're struggling with these changes or just started to wonder how you can transition from traditional or hybrid to fully remote, this episode is exactly for you. We have a very special guest, someone who has many years of experience in traditional and remote environments and has transferred his skills to different fields. So we're very excited about today's episode and how it can bring you value. But before we get into topic, as always, we want to make you a part of our show. We've prepared a poll, and Jess is going to tell you all about it. Hey, Jess, how are you?
Hey, Gabby, I'm doing great. Thank you for asking. We asked you guys on LinkedIn, when considering a career change, what factors are important for you? I'm going to list them from the list that we got votes from. The fourth place was company culture and values. With 16 votes, important to note that. The third place, it was growth opportunities with 76 votes. The second, it's work balance, and that had 128. And the first place with 160 votes, we had salary and benefits. So we know that this result, we can say that it's more important having money and good balanced life, A lot of our nowadays bosses now that are listening to this know that this is really important. It's not that the other ones are not, but it's just like taking that into account. So Gabby, do you relate that this is the order of responses, or do you think it could be different?
Yeah, so I think that they're very interesting because even though we didn't ask people in what order these are important, it still shows. I don't know if you've heard about the Maslow pyramid, which is the needs, the personal needs that you have. So first you have the physiological needs and safety and security, and all that you need to cover it in this world with money. So it makes sense that the most chosen option was actually, benefits and salary. Then it makes sense that the next one is work-life balance, because again, after you have those needs covered, what else do you need? Well, you need to feel that you belong. You need to feel like you are self-realized. I think that's the word in English. Self-actualization, you can say. And then it makes sense all the rest. You know what was interesting for me was that company culture and values was the last one, because I feel it's the most underestimated one. And people don't know that if you don't consider it from the beginning, it's going to bite you later. It's going to be interesting. I hope that we touch a little bit more on this further on. But these results were definitely interesting, and just the order of importance that people gave to it, it was just pretty cool to see.
The order and the number,
the amount of votes.
Yeah, the amount of votes, only company cultures with 16 votes. But it's okay. We wanted to thank you guys because it's important for us always to keep in touch with you guys and just keep participating and commenting on our posts and our LinkedIn. And just remember always to be there on also our Telegram group that we're going to be posting a lot of different updates.
Definitely. Thank you guys for being a part of the show. Well, a little bit now going into topic. Like I said before, today we have the privilege of welcoming a true expert in the world of remote work, who is Verner Carew. He has over 15 years of experience working in telecommunications and IT platforms. And in recent years, he's been working for companies from other industries like marketing and recruitment. So we can say that he brings a wealth of knowledge to the table. Verner is currently working as a PMO at 3 different American companies, all fully remote. He definitely is no stranger to the intricacies of managing multiple roles in a virtual environment. His dedication to excellence and his commitment to personal growth have earned him a reputation as a hard-working leader who thrives in the face of challenges. Today, we're going to pick his brain to know more about how his career path has shifted in direction through his professional years and how he's adapted to the remote work environment. Welcome, Verner. How are you feeling about today's conversation?
Oh my God. Thank you so much for that introduction, Gabby. Thank you, Jess. I'm honored to be invited to this podcast today. And I hope that this conversation is productive and that you're actually, in fact, able to pick my brain and get some insights from me.
It will be really, really good. So, Verner, before we start asking like deep questions, what do you think about what or LinkedIn audience answer regarding those motives to change their career paths?
I mean, those results are really interesting, definitely. I think that putting the first option as salary and benefits, I think it's a very honest response. I think it makes sense. Definitely, everybody wants improvements and they want to be able to cover those basic needs. And of course, you need money to do that. So it makes sense that salary is at the top of the selection. I do agree with what Stella was mentioning regarding how underestimated company culture and values is. It's impressive that only 16 people voted for this. Definitely something that maybe not many people realize is that if you're working for a company whose culture and values do not resonate with you, that's just simply not sustainable. That it comes to bite you eventually, and you will feel it, you know? So yeah, I guess that's something that people learn along the way, but it's a pretty interesting result.
It would be nice to understand or interesting to understand really how important that is to today's generations. Because again, today's generations are not so inclined to lasting so much in a job. I believe that if they had a job that is sustainable, that is like aligns with their values, I'm sure that they'll stay. But they're quicker to decide if not. I don't know if this decision, like if this poll actually reflects on that, like really, maybe they're not considering that when they go through the selection process. Because again, even though you are recruited most of the times, like people invite you to the process and they have to decide if you are a good fit for the company, you can also choose that part if the company is a good fit for you. So I don't know. And I think like we could do maybe like another poll later on and ask people about what they think specifically about that. But definitely those results are very, very insightful. I think that they generate a lot of good questions.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Thinking in the future, it's really important. So you should be on a stable job. Like what is the company bringing to the table? Yeah.
Yeah.
So Verner.
Exactly.
Verner, let's start from the beginning. Many of our listeners are likely considering or have already made a leap to remote work, right? Can you take us back to when you first made that switch from the office life to remote work? Like, did your role or path change at some extent? Like, what are some of the biggest adjustments that you've made and how did you handle them?
Basically, when people think about transitioning to a remote work environment, we go back to the pandemic because that's when basically most of the workforce had to migrate from local physical offices to their homes, right? For me, the process was a little bit different. I actually started transitioning to a remote working location before the pandemic. one of the roles that I exercised or I worked at was as an implementation engineer, and I had to do, I had on-call shifts, right? I would need to work weekends on call, and definitely the company wouldn't want me to be in the office, 24/7 during the weekend, right? So they would allow me to bring my equipment home and just take the calls there and, work from home. This was very specific to this role that I worked in. And then I sort of took it a step higher when I became a technical support manager. At that time, and this was around maybe 2018, 2019, actually working from home was seen as emotional salary. It was like a perk that you could give your employees, or your staff, the people you work with, your team. And I saw that as a means to increase my team's satisfaction, so we started implementing those 1 day work from home a week, So of course that brought me into a step closer into understanding what is necessary in order to have a team that is not locally working with you, right? Then of course the pandemic hit. We all had to go home. And of course, even as prepared as I felt, because somehow I started, sort of dabbling into working from home and managing a team while being on different locations, new hindrances came, definitely, I guess the most important change was, being in the same place that you live, now becoming your office, right? So of course, when you start working directly in your home, you need to start sort of investigating what are the best practices. Because of course, in order for it to be sustainable, and at that time, it needed to be sustainable because we didn't know how long we would be quarantined, you need to start sort of understanding what would be the best dynamics. And that's when, of course, you started to understand that you need to have a prepared working space, that you needed to set specific times to take breaks and actually disconnect a little bit from your work, that you needed to set specific schedules to work and then to stop working, which for me personally was one of the biggest challenges, to be honest. And yeah, I mean, as time progressed, I definitely started feeling more and more comfortable. And since 2020 until today, I haven't gone back. I mean,
we always talk about that. Since you go to remote job, you don't want to go back.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. For some of us, I know, I definitely know some people that did not resonate with working from home. And that's also something very important. It's important. One of the things that I feel it's most important is to be very, self-aware.
Yeah,
and honest
definitely
with yourself and see if this works for you, because we don't all work the same. Some of us, they need that human contact, so that's a value.
And also there are fields that need to be presential. We also have to consider that. Like, I think with the pandemic, we understood that there were a lot of things that we could do from home. I remember with my experience particularly, yes, it went back to the pandemic, but before that, I would always insist to my boss that I could do my work from home. And I remember because I lived very far away from my job. So the commuting part was hellish, honestly. But and I would tell him, like, I'm sure that I can do this exact thing from home. I used to produce a news show for radio before. And actually, I knew that I could do it from home. I could talk to the journalists. I could prepare the script. I could do everything that I did from home, but we never prepared for that. And then the pandemic just proved me right that I could do it from home. And actually, it was a quick shift, but it would have been nice to have that hybrid approach first, like you mentioned, like first go through the hybrid approach where you use it as a perk, because of course I think it is a perk. Still nowadays, like a lot of businesses, they need to have some kind of physical and personal contact with their members. And now what they do to just get to a middle point, they use that hybrid modality where, okay, you can go to the office maybe once or twice a week, but then the rest of the week you can do everything on your own. Because I think that's something that has shifted in mentality when it comes to remote work is not micromanaging. Like I think that before a lot of businesses, they like to have people in their site just to supervise them a little bit more closely. And I think that remote work really showed you how to do more things and really depends more on the skill sets that your team has to still be able to deliver things, and really just rely on their professionalism and their ethics to be able to deliver under the standards that you provide. So definitely that's the challenges that you mentioned, exactly the distraction of being home. Also, it really happened for me too. I remember there was a point where I would be alone, and the days that I had my roommates like be there with me, I would be like it would be so hard to concentrate because just that change of having to work with the same people that I lived with was harsh. So you definitely go through some phases there. Werner, as someone who successfully navigated the transition to remote work and have changed your career path on occasion, what advice would you give to those considering a similar route? Like, are there any strategies or mindset shifts that helped you adapt to the virtual work environments more smoothly? I know that you mentioned setting boundaries, time frames to work. Like, what other things do you consider that make this transition successful?
I guess as I mentioned, the first thing that you need to take into consideration is a self-assessment. If this is a conscious decision, if you're currently working in a physical location and you're thinking about changing to this is a conscious decision for you, the first thing I would say is really sit down and ask yourself how are your self-organizational skills? Most of these remote works, and you will see them in the job descriptions. They look for people who can deliver the results with minimum supervision. And this comes with what you mentioned about micromanaging, So it's very important that if you're making the conscious decision of transitioning from your current work, where you're in an office, where your supervisor, your executive team, your team members are right there with you and you rely heavily on them, take a moment, sit down and ask yourself, am I going to be able to work without these interactions? Am I going to be able to actually organize my task and prioritize them without having somebody constantly supporting me into taking these decisions? And I think that's the first thing that you need to ask yourself. And then, of course, strain a little bit away from that, from those self skills or from those soft skills. Also, take a hard look at how your life would look once you transition to a work environment. It's really important that you evaluate your environment conditions, because trust me, for many of us, when we started working from home, we would just take maybe our laptops and put them in the
table,
diner table. And then we would just, work from there. And then the whole family, everybody would be there. They would come and they would think that because you're sitting there, you're doing nothing. And then you're in the midst of a meeting. And then, so before even considering doing that change, take a look at your house. Where could I set my space? And this doesn't mean that you have to have like an office or something like that, but just think where you could position a safe space that you can dedicate to your work,
Yeah. And now that you mentioned that, like making a leap to remote work can sometimes be blurred, between personal life and just professional life. So how did you establish those boundaries to maintain healthy work balance? Like any tips for setting boundaries or switching off from your home doubles as your office?
In my case specifically, I went great lengths to separate my working space from my personal space. Okay. I fortunately, I do have a space. I have a spare room at home that I literally conditioned to be my office. And that's where I spend 8 to 9 hours a day. And when it comes to the moment of actually stopping work, I get up off my desk. I just, close the door and I'm home. That for me, that's the separation. But it's interesting that you mentioned this because, even if you're separating your spaces, if you don't make a conscious effort into shutting down your mindset, your working mindset, and then shifting to a personal mindset, you can have separate spaces, but still your head, it's going to keep working. And for me personally, that was one of the biggest hindrances. For me, it's very complicated to switch off, that portion. So one of the tips that I have is that not only do I shut the door of my office, I normally go and do something else. I personally find it, yes, I go outside. I train, I exercise, both for personal reasons. It's good for you. And it's an amazing way to disconnect, from the, and sometimes I would even feel like, because I exercise, it's pretty funny. The exercising court is pretty close to my house. So I just, I change and I go there. And sometimes I just get off my desk like 15 minutes and I'm training, and even as I start training, I'm still thinking about work. But then when I start training, everything goes away because I'm so tired that I just can only think that I want to get through the routine, So it's pretty important to have those little rituals and habits and taking care of yourself. It's important that you understand that a big part of thriving into a remote environment, it's considering your personal health and well-being, and disconnecting and, respecting your spaces is a great part of that routine.
Absolutely. For me, more than actually doing something after like having a shutdown ritual, for me, it took time. Like for me, it took about 1 or 2 years to realize that me working at 11 p.m. was not the best approach. So what worked for me was having an established 9 to 6 kind of work frame where I said, okay, after 6 o'clock, this is no longer my day. This is, have you seen those reels that's like, well, and when it's 5:59 and you're working hard and then it's 6 o'clock and then you're like, shut down, bye-bye. It can wait for tomorrow. Fortunately, I work in a work field where everything can wait for tomorrow. Honestly, if I didn't finish it at 6 o'clock, it's not gonna make a difference if it's ready at 6:30. So I might as well just get up and do something else. And that actually improved a lot my work-life balance because then I was able to be more focused when I was working. So really having those strict boundaries works. Having that shutdown ritual also works. If it's just like closing your laptop or just tidying up your workspace or closing your office, if you have like a dedicated space for that, just do that because it really does make a difference. And if you have to go as far as to get out of the house and do something different, do that too. It makes total sense. And at the same time, when you're working alone and you only see your computer all day, you need to go out and see other people. It's stuff like that's a must too, because when you least expect it, you've been in your house for 2 weeks, you haven't seen a soul in those 2 weeks, and you don't know that, like you don't like willingly or like rationally know that, but that affects the way that you socialize and the way that you take on things. So you definitely need to do that for yourself, take care of yourself, and go out. Werner, now I want us to get a little bit into the nitty-gritty of remote work success. Managing multiple roles remotely is not a small feat, and you've been doing that. How do you stay organized and on top of your game with so many responsibilities on your plate? Like, are there any tools, techniques, or routines that you've found particularly helpful in managing your workload effectively among the different companies that you work or the different things that you do? Because you have 3 remote works, but a lot of people work freelance and they're working for different clients at the same time. So what advice would you give to knowing how to manage that workload effectively?
What you mentioned about people who work freelance, I can definitely resonate with that because, as you mentioned, I work for 3 companies, right? I do exercise the same role for the 3 of them. I manage the project portfolio. So it's within the same sort of,
area,
business line,
business
if
line.
you will. Yeah. The same area. But then again, the nature of each company is so different that, of course, at some point, it feels like I'm freelancing, because I have to change from recruiting to a digital agency to B2B. So at some point, it can feel like, wow, what am I doing with my day? So definitely, I think that leveraging technological tools in order to get the job done, it's extremely important. Of course, having a personal organizational, structure or standard helps a lot. But then, of course, there are a lot of tools that probably the company for which you're going to be working with, or even if you're a freelancer, you can subscribe to these tools, such as Asana, Trello, ClickUp. There are many, technical project management / task management tools that can greatly help you organize not only your time, but communicate effectively with the teams that you're working with. Okay. So it's important that you sort of test and understand how these tools work, because they can definitely make your work so much easier. Okay. Not only leveraging these organizational project or task management tools is going to do the trick for you. It's also important that you understand how to structure your day. One of the rituals that I have and that I found it helps me a lot is I start every day. I keep tabs on everything that's going on around me. And again, since I work 3 companies, I'm constantly bombarded by new things. Like every time something new is happening. And I've learned that if I try to tackle everything at once, I'm going to become overwhelmed. I'm not going to be able to get anything done. I'm going to spread myself thin. I'm going to get overwhelmed. I'm going to feel like I'm not getting anything done. And at the end of the day, I'm probably going to collapse. It has happened. It's normal. So what I have learned is that I try to take everything in, like everybody's coming to me. Okay, tell me what's going on. I will take notes. And this is very personal for me. I will take notes. And then when you see my task list is immense, but every day I go through my whole task list and I say, okay, what are the priorities of the day? And this goes across companies because I like to say that they're all my babies, right? So it's not about giving more attention to one than the others. It's about understanding what's a priority for each one of them. And the only way to do that is to having like this backlog of activities. And then at the beginning of your day, just making a priority list. Okay, what's the most important? What is blocking the work of other departments? What requires immediate confirmation from me? What it requires to be escalated? So that sort of thing, I start my day just dedicating maybe 20, 30 minutes to going through my backlog of activities. And then I can either, sometimes I will just put a little check beside that task. Sometimes I rewrite them. Sometimes when it becomes so big that it's like, I'm going to get lost in this, what I do is I just rewrite them. I say, okay, I have 30 tasks.
Write them down.
You know what? Exactly. Realistically, I'm going to be able to get through 6 of them. So I just write the 6 and then I focus on them. I give them priorities and I focus on them. And as I start finishing them and crossing them off, it's amazing how you see how that backlog starts reducing and the anxiety level that it can cause you, it starts reducing itself. You feel productive. You feel that you're getting things done. You're actually bringing value. In my case, to the companies that I work for. In the case of a freelancer, it's probably the same because you're going to be working for several companies and you're going to stay pretty much on top of your game.
Yeah, you're right.
So I guess that's pretty much how I organize myself.
When you don't have a lot of supervision, you need to be able to see those things through by yourself, because then you can get frustrated easily when you're like,
Absolutely.
I don't know how to do this, or I've been trying to do this, get into this for a week and I can't. So really breaking down the tasks in feasible like actions, it makes more sense and it really helps the frustration levels.
Yeah, definitely. I also think that management tools can work a lot, like Asana, ClickUp, Trello, sorry. I don't know if there's other one that you guys use that could benefit the listeners. Also, what you said, like those management tools can set you goals or deadlines, which are really important so that you can know what to focus on or just like take more time in to do that. Also, I think the routine part you said is really important, like waking up a certain hour, finishing, like having your lunch, like literally eating. It's so important, and exercising too after you finish your work. Time blocking, I don't know, that's also really important, or limit your multitasking. There are some people that can do a lot of things at once, but that may not be good for some other people, and then you can distract yourself from that. Also, I think that managing calendar apps like Google, or also reviewing the daily or weekly process. I don't know how you manage the project management. Also, I think this is really important, like delegating tasks when you have a teamwork. It's really, really important because, you know, you're not alone, you know, you have people that you work with in this, it's a company, you know, it's not like you're just a freelancer. You have people that can just work with you. And I think it's part of like motivation that like sometimes there are days that you go like wake up with a happy face, but there's some other days that you're not as motivated. So keeping motivation levels high in a remote work setup can be a challenge. Werner, what keeps you inspired and driving in your role? Like, are there any personal habits you rely or stay motivated and focused, especially during those inevitable moments of self-doubt or when you feel like you're burnout?
For me personally, self-motivation comes from, I actually find it fascinating how the experience that I brought from previous jobs, which were so different from the business line that I'm currently working. I used to work IT and telecommunications, and now I'm working marketing, recruiting. So understanding how that knowledge actually applies to this, to me, is fascinating. You know, just seeing how things can actually fit into other spaces. It's actually important to, whenever I feel self-doubt or when I feel that I'm becoming burnout, I found that it's really important to take a moment, to take a breather. It's completely valid to, when you come to these moments, because as you mentioned, there's a lot of things going on. It's completely valid to just take 5 minutes, 15 minutes, you know, gather yourself. And then, you know what, something that, I really got this from actually, a friend of mine. He taught me to do mindfulness.
Oh, yes.
It's something that can definitely help you so much, into focusing and refocusing your energy. And bear in mind, in remote setups, you are, even though you have your working team and you have all these, enterprise support, you are by yourself. So at the end of the day, these tools that help you reconnect with yourself and refocus are completely valid, and they help you get through the day, you know? So definitely taking regular breaks, understanding when to stop. It's completely valid to say, hey, you know, it's also very important to understand when you are just not productive. You know, it comes to a point when you're, and even it doesn't have to be that you're working on a bunch of things at the same time. Sometimes you're working just on one thing, and it's so lengthy, so complex, that at some point you're just staring at the screen, and it has happened to me. I go like, what am I doing? What is it? Exactly. And then when that happens, normally what I do is I either switch tasks. If I have a lot of things to do, I say, okay, what else do I have if I'm feeling productive, what else do I have in my pipeline that can sort of abstract myself from this activity so I can come back in with a fresh mindset? Or if I'm like completely tired, I will normally, you know, get off my desk, you know, maybe I'll do a run around the block. Exactly. And then I'll come back in with a fresh mindset.
Sometimes you just have to acknowledge that today is not the day to solve this problem.
Absolutely.
I have a lot of developer friends, and they're always saying the same thing. Like, you know, sometimes you have a bug, you have an issue, you're not going to solve it at the moment. And the next day you're going to wake up and you're going to know exactly what to do. But if you're like too into the problem, it makes it harder. And again, I think that what you mentioned about mindfulness and self-care in general, it just helps you put things into perspective. Like work is important, and we're not going to say that it isn't. Like it gives you a sense of realization, of accomplishment, but it is not your life. So when you actually understand that, it makes it easier for you to find solutions to problems that seem so big if the only thing that you're seeing is work. If the only thing that you're seeing is work throughout the day and you don't know how to balance that, you're going to get uninspired very quickly. So it helps to actually step aside, like step outside of the workspace and do other things, because actually by doing other things, you can find inspiration in those activities and see how you can solve a problem inside your work. I feel like that always like helps me. Like sometimes I just meet up with friends and they tell me their problems in their fields, and the way that they approach their issues, I'm like, oh wait, I can do that too. Like it sounds counterproductive, but really take time to step away from work so that when you are working, it makes more sense and you actually feel more inspired. Something that also worked for me is just celebrating the things that I do achieve, celebrating my achievements. And you will have workspaces where other people don't do that for you, and especially in freelance where everyone is doing their thing on their own. You're not always going to have someone that's that's celebrating each of your accomplishments, but do that for yourself. And I think that's why it's important to set boundaries, to set deadlines and clear objectives with the things that you do, so that when you accomplish them, when you finish them, you can celebrate those achievements, because you know that you started it and you finished it. And then the other thing that for me works, I don't know if this resonates with you, Werner, is just learning. For me, I love the process of learning. And actually, the moments that I felt like most frustrated in certain jobs that I've had is when I feel that I'm not learning anymore. Has that ever happened to you?
Absolutely. That now that you mention it, I mean, the experience of learning and again, seeing how your previous knowledge can heighten and, benefit from these new things that you're learning. It's something that can be very personally fulfilling, Definitely when you see how you can reach new levels in your career by learning new things and applying what you already know. I think that's a very big achievement, a very big personal achievement. Now that you mentioned the learning process, something that I find that is also very important, it's not only learning, but also unlearning. Many people, and especially for myself, this is something that I came to realize when I started working with these companies, was basically how I needed to unlearn many things that I had brought because they just didn't fit. Even though it was within the same sort of working structure, it did just not fit what the company needed. So I had to unlearn so many things while learning new ones. So it's a process,
Can you give us some examples? Like
oh my God,
of habits, techniques, or things that you just had to say, okay, this is no longer serving the remote process?
For me, definitely something that I had to unlearn, in this new experience was the project management structure itself. Coming from actually working telecommunications and IT, and even working on a physical location, we would have physical meetings, and normally these communications would be peer-to-peer. Like when you go into a meeting, like a physical meeting, you would go into an office, and then you would have other PMs and then project managers, and then other project managers would be like, okay, this is my timeline. What is your timeline looking like? And you would need to sort of have these conversations on a very technical level, and you'd have the same level of understanding. When you bring this into a digital agency, for example, you will see that your clients or the people you're managing projects with are not going to speak your language. Like probably they're not going to be so focused, and they won't understand when you tell them about scope or about a timeline or about probably they will understand budget, because that's an universal
Yeah.
concept, right? But then maybe that structure, trying to enforce that level of structure with somebody that's just not a PM, it won't bring the result. So you need to understand how to make it digestible for the other person in order for you as a PM to make sure that you're compliant with your work, but then also maintaining your client or that peer up to the understanding level that you want them to be. And an additional one that I also had to learn was to change the way I express some of my findings. For example, coming from a very technical background, I was very used to explaining things on technical terms, especially when it comes to web development or IT. But again, when you have end clients or end users that are not so tech savvy, maybe you're going to talk to them about APIs. Maybe you're going to talk to them about servers, backends, things like that, mailing protocols, and they will not understand it and they might get frustrated. So I had to learn how to break down these conversations into more digestible terms.
So simplifying the language.
Absolutely.
Like
yes.
you said, when you're working with people that are in your same level of specialty, it's normal to get all technical and go crazy with the jargon. But when you're talking to another kind of audience, which I believe happened in the career path change that you had, where you were before working with more technical fields and now you're working with end clients, that's a big change. You had to learn that part. Yeah, it makes total sense. It is hard to learn that also, because it can happen at any point when you get too specialized in what you're doing. Then having to simplify that language for other people, it's definitely something that you have to unlearn. To learn, to unlearn, I guess.
Yes.
I get you.
Yeah, we're in the
you.
process of learning to unlearn.
There you go.
Yeah. Werner, there's a topic about working remotely that's often overlooked. And it's that remote work can sometimes raise questions about ethics and professionalism, particularly when it comes to issues like accountability and transparency. How do you maintain ethical standards in your remote work practices, especially when the digital workspace can be new and ambiguous at times? Like, are there any guiding principles or values that you prioritize in your interactions with peers, people you supervise, and clients?
For this point specifically, one of the values that I cherish the most, and I definitely try to exercise as much as possible, is communication. I always say that communication is key, right? Especially when we're in these remote environments, communication tends to get misinterpreted if it's not clear and if it's not transparent. So for me, it's absolutely important to keep not only crystal clear communication with my team, but also with my peers and also with the executive team. And this is something that I have learned not only to provide, not only do I strive to be very communicative and clear in my message, but this is something that I also ask in return. Because it's also important to understand that in order for me to understand the expectation, what are the boundaries? Because definitely each company or each client you work with, it's probably going to have a different set of boundaries. So if there is a clear line of communication in what the boundaries most likely I will be able to commit to these boundaries. Communication is going to be efficient. And of course, the end result is going to be the optimal one. Okay. Regarding ethics, it's definitely important to understand that not only transparency, it's important, self-accountability and being self-critical of your work, it's very important. We circle back to not being micromanaged when you're working on a remote environment. And this applies not only for people who work in an enterprise, meaning that there might be an organizational structure that is probably more defined, where you will have a supervisor that's going to supervise you in this case, or you're going to be reporting to somebody. This also applies to people who work freelance. It's so important that you're critical of your work, that you commit to deliver with quality, and that in any scenario that you're working with, that you're working for, just strive to actually deliver with top quality, everything that you do. Okay. So to me, definitely communication, it's extremely important both ways. setting clear boundaries and understanding what your client or what your company is expecting from you, and also being very critical of the quality of your work are, to me, the ones that resonate the most and the ones that I try to exercise the most.
I agree. And thank you so much. Like, that's really important. Also, like seeking feedback and accountability. It's really important. Like everything you said, it's really value. Now that we're coming to an end, as someone who's been in both office-based and remote work cultures, how do you see the virtual work environment shaping organizational ethics and values? Like, are there any unique challenges or opportunities that arise in maintaining a strong ethical culture in remote setting?
I think definitely, for companies that are working with remote staff, it's probably a challenge. It's important that these companies take the time to set these guidelines. They understand their values and their ethical guidelines, so they can concisely and effectively, communicate them to the people, their collaborators, people who are working with them. And I think this is a great opportunity. I think we're coming into a time that, companies should be looking at the benefits, in terms of costs, in terms of flexibility, in terms of, striving away from this mentality of just complying with a schedule, but actually looking for results and quality, and how they can achieve that, with having remote staff, how they can leverage so much people from around the globe to, collaborate, with their goals. So yeah, of course it comes with challenges and hindrances. One of the ones that I see the most is about information security. It's really important that companies make a conscious investment in safeguarding and setting clear information security guidelines, because of course, you're not going to have your staff at one place, and it's very important that you find ways and means to sort of, protect yourself from potential information leaks or information breaches, So yeah, that's how I see it. That's how I see it shaping up.
Well, thank you. That's very important.
Yeah, something that I see is key is communication in general. I feel like people that shift into the digital world, they don't really understand the importance of effective communication, because not just because you say a lot means that you're saying the important things. So it's really learning how to establish clear channels of communication, appropriate channels of communication, knowing when you have to trigger communications between one and the other. I think that it's essential. Werner, for those listeners who are considering transitioning to fully remote work, what are the key factors they should weigh when making that decision? Like, are there any misconceptions about remote work that you'd like to mention based on your own experience?
Absolutely. Do not think that because you're going to be working from home, you're like going to have a bunch of free time.
Yeah.
There is flexibility and there's free time. When you're working from home, if you're doing it correctly, you will dedicate the hours and the effort to your work. And that's how we should be looking at it. Remote work, it's not escape. It's probably not going to make it any funnier. It's probably going to make it more enjoyable, but definitely you need to understand that remote work, it's still work. So you need to put the effort and you need to treat it as work. And that's a very personal commitment that you have to do, and that's why I say at the beginning that it's not for everybody. Maybe not everybody is going to understand that because you're at home, you're actually working. So I think that's the biggest misconception I've heard. I got people coming to me and saying, "Oh, you work from home? Your days must be so easy." And I'm like,
you have no idea.
You don't know what you're saying.
You have no idea. Yeah, because when you're at home, you get so focused on the job. No one is talking to you. So I can stay in my seat, like literally working, and then I just stand up and my back, it's hurting. I also forget taking like those moments of just stretching. Stop doing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I think important also to consider career advancement. Because again, like a lot of people like get into a remote work and they don't consider how that could transition in their life. What do you think about that, Werner?
Career advancement, that's a very interesting topic. I've seen a lot of positions, and somehow I feel that when transitioning to remote work, it's important that you analyze, how that can look in your future. Don't just think about, I'm going to transition to remote work. Maybe I'm just going to be doing this very routinary activity for how long, because there are so many opportunities to actually advance in your career and have a career plan if you make the right choice. This could go either way. If you just select something that just because it's remote, it appeals to you, maybe you will end up doing something that is going to be so routinary that come 1 year, I'm so bored. And then probably you're going to pin it on the fact that you're working remote. And that's not going to be the case. Trust me, I've been working remote for a long time and I have never gotten bored. But that's because I've been lucky enough at some point and because I have made some decisions that put me in career paths that have helped me grow in my career plan and path, towards, becoming a better professional and having new responsibilities. So it's really important that that's taken in consideration when you're looking for a remote job also.
Amazing. I want to thank you, Werner, for joining us today, for being a part of the show and being so insightful. Because again, I do think that a lot of people are going to listen to this and they're going to feel like either familiar with it or they're definitely going to get some ideas, like some tips about everything you said. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you for joining us. I hope that you can join us in the future for another episode.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much, Gabby. Thank you, Jess, for having me. And definitely, I'll be more than happy to join you guys again.
Great. So guys, thanks for tuning into today's episode of The Hired Hub with our special guest, Werner. We've covered a lot of ground from transitioning to remote work to staying focused and motivated. Remember, remote work is all about adapting, staying organized, and maintaining integrity. Big thanks to Werner for sharing his insights. Until next time, keep thriving in the remote world. This is Gabby Morales.
And this is Jess Torres. Please remember to follow us on social media and take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
That wraps another episode of the Hired Hub podcast. We hope you found today's discussion empowering and insightful. Remember, success in the world of remote work is within your reach, and we're here to support you every step of the way.
Be sure to subscribe to our podcast for more expert advice and engaging conversations. Please give us a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify to help us reach more people who can benefit from the Hired Hub podcast.